It's Just Business with Steve Thomas and your host, Chris Larry.
Hello and welcome to another episode of It's Just Business on the Hogside Network, the show where we look at the dollars and cents of the sports media business industry, environment, something or other, complex, industrial zone, one of these business buzzwords. How you doing today, Steve?
I'm doing just fine. How about you? How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good, pretty good.
Would you like to hear my complaint for the week?
Oh, sure. You're one?
Well, it's my prime. It's the one that's going through my head right now. Because This morning, as I was getting ready for the show and everything, I was eating breakfast and I opened my daily YouTube and I see a cell phone filmed from the arena of Ozzy Osbourne's induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. A 16-minute cell phone video of the entire event, which I watched an hour ago. And so they go through this thing and mention Randy Rhoads. In the like the preview film thing, mention Zach Wilde. Not one mention of Jakey Lee, not one mention of Bob Daisley, Phil Soussan, all the other people who wrote and created the songs and wrote all of Ozzy's lyrics. Ozzy isn't a musician, for those of you don't understand this. Ozzy isn't a musician at all. And not one mention of especially Jakey Lee and Bob Daisley. Could not believe it. I just thought it was tacky and classless. So that's my complaint.
Is it, I first of all, I consider, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is a complete
It's a joke. It's a complete joke. Yeah.
I'm sure it's actually fun to go and as like a museum. I'm sure it's probably a good way to kill an afternoon, but as a housing for any kind of Hall of Fame thing, it's ridiculous. I mean, They're just letting anybody in at this point.
It's ridiculous, and it's called the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Yet they're letting rappers and country singers and everything, but actually, ironically, rock and roll. Like rock and roll is the last thing to get into Rock and Roll Hall of Fame nowadays.
But also, even the fact that you would even have one is dumb.
It is dumb, but it's the Ozzy thing. I mean, I don't know if people understand who Ozzy really is. I love his music. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm not a huge Black Sabbath fan because it's like too ponderous for me. But Tony Iommi wrote all the Sabbath songs. Ozzy does not play an instrument, and he's not really that musical. He at most he's done some vocal melodies, and that's it. And yet, he's through Sharon, who's the real evil monster of this, has taken all kinds of credit from people who really wrote the songs. Like she claimed he wrote Shot in the Dark for 20 years and got sued over it, and it turns out they really stole the song from someone else, and it's just I just find it all just gross.
Now this is going in as Ozzy Osbourne, right? Black Sabbath is already in.
Black Sabbath's in, so it's Ozzy's solo. But I don't know how you can put Ozzy's solo in without putting in the entire band with him. I don't get it.
Yeah, because because the institution doesn't really care about those level of details. They're just ushering in names at this point.
Yeah, and it's like names that they're connected with, and they've left off all kinds of the idea that like Foreigner just got in, for example. Styx, I don't think is in the rock and roll. All these like great 70s rock bands are not in. They haven't even touched like 80s hair band stuff. While their image was crazy. They made a lot of great music, and some of those bands haven't even looked at them. So I just find the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame distasteful, but I really found the Ozzy presentation especially distasteful.
They should have just. Well, also Jan Wenner's gross, and it's all his baby anyway.
Yeah.
They should have just They should have just said we're going to do a rock and roll museum, and then you would have said, hey, we have a a special exhibit on 80s hair metal bands. It's going to run for a year or whatever. Like, this Hall of Fame is so dumb.
Yeah, it is. Like, what Hall of Fame, and you're going to put, if you put this many, like 5 or 6 artists in every single year, it kind of loses its appeal as a Hall of Fame, doesn't it? I mean, at some point you run out of worthy names.
It just becomes, who are the handful of names that most people recognize that become eligible every year. That's all it is.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, Rock and Roll Museum would be cool. They should have called it like the Popular Pop Music, museum in Cleveland. That would have been better.
Yeah. And if I listen, there's not many opportunities that I'm in Cleveland, but if I was in Cleveland for whatever reason, I would actually go because I'm sure it's actually a pretty good museum. But other than that, like the Country Music Hall of Fame is an amazing museum.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. And I haven't watched the thing on. I don't even know if it's on HBO anymore. I think it's on.
No, I think they
network.
stream it. Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't watched it in years because I got sick of it. But I just happened to stumble on the Ozzy induction thing this morning randomly, and it just really irritated me that you just totally glazed over all the people that created, performed, and wrote his music.
Was he at all cogent when he accepted?
No, he was in this really like tarted up, glammed up wheelchair on stage. Yeah, and I don't know who. It was a really bad angle. I couldn't really honestly tell who was like speaking for him, but he didn't even say anything. All he said was "all aboard" right before the band launched into Crazy Train.
So he didn't even do any performing.
Not really, and he didn't perform at all. He said a couple thanks to Sharon, and he said like less than 30 seconds of words, and then went all aboard, and that was when they played music, and that was it. But it was a fit, and he mentioned Randy, he thanks Sharon, and then the video mentioned Zach Wilde, but not one mention of all those other people at all.
Well, the injustice, Steve, the injustice.
I know. On behalf of Bob Daisley, I'm irritated. Bob, if you're listening to this, just know I'm on your side.
Well, there you go. Well, Steve, maybe to cheer you up a little bit is we will kind of in a roundabout way talk about your Los Angeles Dodgers here as we discuss what seems to be a hit this year in the Major League Baseball postseason, as they are after what what was a good 2024 and all the ways that they count metrics in terms of butts in seats as well as eyeballs on screens. Has been a good solid year for baseball, and now they are kind of reaping the rewards, the rating rewards specifically throughout their postseason. Starting with the wild card round, they're sort of setting records for viewership. Even obviously they're not beating the NFL, but they're holding their own against the NFL.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of stories on this. What we just stumbled on. If you want an example of one story, it's CNBC MLB playoff viewership surges as big market stars vie for the World Series by Jake Piazza. Wonder if there's any relation.
It's Mike's nephew.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. When is this date? October 16th. Yeah. So what it the summary here is what Chris just said, which is ratings have been through the roof. He gives an example of the Mets-Dodgers game on this past Sunday. It would have been last Sunday, which I think would have been game one probably, with 8.26 million viewers all across Fox TV networks and streaming, which was the most watched league championship game on any network since 2009. The American League, the B League, which is the American League. The Yankees Cleveland series 4% uptick from 2023 with 3.9 million viewers. And now those games, and they've been competing with Sunday Night Football and Monday Night Football both, and kind of holding their own, which is good.
Even Thursday Night Football.
Yeah, and just generally speaking, the ratings for baseball have been up this year. As you mentioned, the ratings for the prior playoff series were up. I think it's a good time for baseball. I don't, this article kind of attributes it in part to the pitch clock, which I think is dumb. I don't think the pitch clock has anything to do with the price of tea in China whatsoever. Basically, they've just had some better matchups and more higher profile stars. I think that's all it is.
Every article, and this goes back to the beginning of the baseball season. This isn't just recent. Every article about like baseball's back or whatever, it's doing well, whatever version of that, they all cite these rule changes, which I guess, but like, I don't see it either. I'm still fairly skeptical. And also the fact that it's like, bullet point 2 every time they talk about this just shows me that it's the league pushing that narrative as much as anything else. What are we talking? I don't have it in front of me. They've shortened the game by 10 minutes or something?
Yeah, something like that. We mentioned this a couple months ago.
Is anyone even noticing that?
No, of course not.
So but it's definitely their lead narrative. I think all you need to know is last year's what was it? Texans, Diamondbacks,
It
right?
was Texas Rangers, Arizona Diamondbacks last year.
Lowest rated or one of the worst ever.
No, according to this article, it was the worst TV ratings in championship history.
Now let's click through. Let's click through this year. Even going back to the wild card, you got huge markets, legendary teams, long, dedicated fan bases like Cleveland. So like I think how you can have any analysis that isn't just the sort of luck of the draw, so to speak, of the caliber of teams and their fan bases and their media markets, is obviously the reason.
Well, yeah, obviously. And look at the World Series, Dodgers, Yankees, that's going to obviously be the World Series. There's no way the Mets are going to win. I mean, the Mets are just a speed bump. So Dodgers, Yankees is going to be huge, huge. They haven't had that massive. For what, 40 years,
It's going to be massive. I'm a Yankees guy. I'm not really a Mets guy, although, I don't
root for New York,
against them.
Generally speaking. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually am. I think Dodgers Yankees would be amazing. So from just that's where I'd like to see this go, just because I think it would be good for baseball. I think it would be an amazing series. And quite frankly, the last, what was that? Sometime in the early-ish 2000s. What was that, like 2000? What was the last Subway Series? The Mets Yankees?
Oh God, it's been a while. Yeah, I'd have to look.
Yeah, it's like 2003.
It's not going to do well because the people in Iowa are not going to care.
No, it's so, and people were shocked when the ratings came back so bad, but it was one,
it's Northeast journalists who are hyper focused on that area are shocked.
But not even that, because Boston could give a crap at that point, right? It's even a smaller, tighter circle.
Yeah. Of course, most of those people are in New York who are writing these things. So
yeah. So now it'll have a ton of juice in New York, but I think it might as well be Diamondbacks, Texans in terms of the rest of the country.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think this goes to show you that I agree about the pitch clock. I think it's so dumb to say, shaving 10 minutes off of, whatever it is, off a 3-hour game, thanks to the pitch clock, is bringing in all of a sudden massive numbers. People can't, with 10 minutes longer, people were totally done with it. No, it's like everything. It's star power and excitement. That's what drives ratings. The Dodgers have the biggest, the highest paid, certainly, player in baseball on their team, Shohei Ohtani, who's, by the way, been in the news for bad things we talked about, but he's been in the news for that. The Yankees have, Aaron Judge, huge,
and Juan Soto
and
Giancarlo Stanton.
It was Stanton, I would say, is more bigger name than Soto, maybe, but yes, there's, I don't know, but big stars, that is what attracts people. Big stars doing amazing things is what attracts ratings. Okay, it has nothing to do with the pitch clock.
No, I think you got megawatt stars here, and megawatt media markets, and megawatt historical teams.
The only thing that would be better for ratings wise is if Clayton Kershaw had been healthy. Can you imagine Clayton Kershaw facing down Aaron Judge in a Dodgers Yankees World Series? That would be like an all-time classic moment for baseball. I'm a huge Clayton Kershaw fan. Okay, but put that aside. Probably the best pitcher, one of the best pitchers in history, facing down his past against the biggest team in baseball history. That would have been an all-time. That's the only thing that would make it bigger.
I mean, as we record this last night, Juan Soto crushed a 3-run home run to basically get past the Indians in a game the Yankees were kind of limping through, quite frankly. And it looked like Cleveland was going to extend the series. This dude, I wonder now. Do I think he'll get a Ohtani contract? No, because I think that's a unique situation. But this dude is gonna get a huge contract.
It's going to be from anybody but the Yankees.
Well, the Mets apparently are loading up for Bear. I think
the Yankees outspend anybody though.
They could, but they got but that's a lot of people they got to pay. I think that's the highest percentages that he returns, but I don't think it's necessarily a lock. But even if you get past where we are right now, you had the Detroit Tigers, you had Padres Dodgers, huge rivalry. I mean,
Padres Dodgers. I don't know if people around the country realize how big of a rivalry Padres Dodgers has become.
Yeah, in a state that's ginormous.
Those teams don't like each other. The players don't like each
rivalry.
other. Yeah, it is.
So even if you kind of go the long tail of the playoffs, going back to the wild card rounds, even the Tigers in Cleveland, from a national interest standpoint, are way more important than like the Diamondbacks, for instance.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Diamondbacks and the Rangers. Did anybody think that was going to be a World Series? Anybody outside of Dallas and Arizona would watch?
No.
They didn't have big star power. The teams are those. Have limited wattage. It just is not exciting. Dodgers, Yankees, even Mets, Yankees and anybody is much, much, much more attractive. So yeah. I don't think baseball, the business angle to it, I think is, I don't think baseball, they can do whatever they want, but I don't think they should take credit for the surge in ratings because, and say it was because of their rule changes. It's simply because there's more stars doing more interesting things, and big teams winning. That's why, period.
And coming off a dynamic season. So
that's what I'm saying. Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Build momentum through the year. Yeah.
Absolutely. And by the way, just as a non-business point, I am not down with Dodgers fans throwing crap at Padres outfielders. Okay. If you guys out there, Dodgers fans are a bit thuggish, to be honest. I mean, they murdered somebody in a parking lot several years ago as a Giants fan. I'm not down with any of that, and don't lump me into that. But if you're out there and you're doing that, just grow up. Okay. It's just a baseball game. But sorry, go ahead.
We live in a relatively base society at this point. Yeah, I think it's fascinating. It's great for baseball. And like I said, all year all their various metrics are up, and it's a good thing. We're all better when baseball does well. When it limps through these seasons, it's not a good look. And I'll say, I think I've been on record saying I'm not a big fan of knee search, but I have definitely watched more playoff baseball than I have maybe in 10 years.
It's funny because you and I, like, unintentionally have had the same path. Like, I didn't watch it. I watched less of the regular season this year than I normally do, but I've watched way more of the playoffs than I normally do. I didn't see the Yankees, Cleveland game yesterday, but I have definitely watched way more playoff baseball than I have before. Just because the matchups have been so good.
Yeah.
And again, that's what's driving ratings. Okay. It's matchups and it's stars. Like, everybody in the sports world is fascinated by Shohei Ohtani. For example, he's got a ridiculous contract. He was in the news for, a gambling scandal. He is putting up humongous numbers. The 50-50 race, this year was big news in the sports world. So that's the kind of thing that drives ratings. Has nothing to do with whether you're saving 10 minutes off a game because of a pitch clock.
And apparently the ratings in Japan are just through the roof.
Oh, okay. I'm sure that is
fairly obvious, but But so that's another feather in their cap, is that because baseball's been interested in growing its international with a game for a long time, and so this just helps them immensely. Every time I watch Ohtani play, I'm just amazed at how big this dude is.
Yeah, he's big dudes. Yeah, because I think if you looked at some data, I think what you would see is people in Japan are on average shorter and lighter than Americans, I think.
But definitely.
Yeah, but Ohtani is not of that
mountain.
Yeah, he really is. I don't know how tall. He's got to be like 6'2" at least.
Now, they had rumors that they may pitch him in the postseason if they need to.
I've heard that. I think even losing a World Series would be secondary to preserving the dude's arm if he's not totally healthy.
Yeah, I think
they said about Kershaw.
It's a Game 7 situation.
Yeah, maybe. That's even what they said. Dodgers said about Kershaw. It's like they said, we're not pitching him no matter what. It's not worth it. We want to preserve his health, even if it means the playoffs. Kershaw shut down. And I don't know what Ohtani's health is, but I do know if he's not 100% healthy, they need to not do it.
Well, we'll check back in on this story because it'll be fascinating to see, if it is Dodgers Yankees, it could be through the stratosphere, and then if it's Yankees Mets, you're going to have stratosphere ratings in Connecticut, New York, and New Jersey.
Okay, so just me Googling Ohtani height and weight revealed 6'4", 209.
Yeah, they said his weight on a broadcast I was watching. I was like, what did they weigh him 5 years ago?
Maybe. But I mean, just the idea he's 6'4" alone. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
Oh, and I hadn't planned on saying this, but I'll sneak this in, and it's sports media related. Is there a worse studio combo than Arod and Derek Jeter?
They are really awkward or something.
They're horrible.
Yeah, they are.
for as charismatic, and you hate him or love him or whatever, but Derek Jeter was the face of baseball for 15 years.
But he's
now a balding bore.
He's terrible in the studio.
Horrible.
Yeah, like Arod, I've always thought is pretty good in the studio by himself because he's kind of like really smarmy, and I don't really like that about people, but he's got some very good insights about baseball typically. But yeah, it's like Derek Jeter is just the worst. I mean, he's a name, and that's why he's there in period, because he's not good. He's not good at this.
Yeah, he called out, and he like totally. What's his name on the Braves? What's his name? One of their all-stars, Freddie.
That guy, I know the name.
Yeah. The way he had a bum ankle, and he's playing through it, right? Jeter called him out on it and said, if it's the playoffs, you better. Meanwhile, in that game, just like 3 innings later, he crushed like a 3-run double or whatever, as he like basically hobbled around the bases. I'm like, now Jeter's calling guys out who are obviously gutting out. I don't know. The guy really is an embarrassment on television, and then pairing him with Arod, they just don't work.
Well, he's a name. Okay. This is understand this about media. It's star power a lot of times overrides substance. In this, it applies to actors. Like, I've never thought Kevin Costner was a particularly good actor, for example. He's always kind of in a lot of things, he's like very wooden and just sort of acts like he's reading off a cue card or something, but he's a huge star. So he continues to get put out there. Now, sports announcers are the same. We're going to get to Tom Brady here later in the show. I mean, he's a bore. Okay. But he's a massive name. Derek Jeter was very charismatic when he was a player, but when it comes to like putting him in front of a studio and having him say substantive things, he's just terrible about it. But he is a star and he's a name, and so they're going to put him out there because people are going to want to know what he has to say, at least for a while.
Yeah, I don't know how long his shelf life is going to be here, and what he really has sort of failed at most of his post baseball playing career choices here. The team management / ownership with the Rays.
Yeah, it was a disaster.
Yeah, now he like is.
And by the way, he didn't have the money to ever do that. And baseball they changed their rules about equity and the ownership for him. And they obviously kind of shoved him into the role because, again, he's such a huge name. But that just goes to show you how important ownership is, and having the capital to do it, which he never did. And the team didn't improve from the organization he bought it from because, in part, he didn't have the money to really put a baseball team together. Yeah, in addition to not being good at it. Yeah.
So, I mean, the Rays are teetering on existence right now.
Well, again, it's there's a difference between being able to hit a baseball and catch and throw a baseball or a football or a basketball and being able to evaluate talent and run an organization. And that everybody can't be good at everything. And it's not a surprise that if you have elite playing skills, that you don't also have elite business skills. Very few people are good at a lot of things like that.
100%. I just was a little bit surprised at how bad he was because when he was playing, he was a good interview. He was good on,
well, he's charismatic in sound bites.
Yeah, I guess that is it, right? And when he's speaking about just having won a World Series game or whatever,
yeah, but
it's a little easier to be charismatic.
Well, yeah, and again, it's 10-second sound bites. That doesn't mean he's going to be able to give in-depth, thoughtful, and relevant analysis on for half an hour in a pregame show.
Although it did make me rage Google Derek Jeter's dating history.
Is that a new term? Did you just coin a new term?
There you go,
Google?
rage Google. Like you with the band members of Ozzy Osbourne. And wow, this guy's roster, and I mean his dating roster, I had sort of forgotten how impressive it was.
Well, go over it. You might as well, do you have?
Well, I mean, it's J-Lo. It's like both Jessica Biel and Jessica Alba, all the Jessicas.
All the Jessicas.
Yeah, so I mean, it was just crazy.
There's like legendary stories of him leaving gifts for people, and as he's shuffling him out the door in the morning and all kinds of stuff.
He was a complete cad, which was fun at the time. But yeah,
not for the people watching him, and maybe not for the women he did that
to.
Well,
for page 6 of the New York Post, it was fabulous. So there we go. So they're boring. But it actually gives us a good transition into our next story, which is just kind of some crazy ownership stories that involve boring ex-athlete broadcasters and Arod. So we've got 3 kind of machinations within various ownership groups. One, I'm sure everybody's heard about Tom Brady now becoming a part owner of the Las Vegas Raiders, as we've got a new private equity czar now as a co-owner or a minority stakeholder of the Los Angeles Chargers, and a court case with Arod and his ownership group and the Minnesota Timberwolves in the NBA. Really kind of fascinating what goes on these ownership groups. Let's take Brady first. That's probably the biggest version of this. The biggest thing, well, there's 2 huge parts of the story for me. One, and we've talked about it before, we probably talk about it a little bit, but I'm just incredulous that the fact that they're going to let this guy continue to call games. I think it completely is a cloud of illegitimacy on the entire sport. The sport can survive it, so I'm just spitting into the wind, I grant you. And the fact that he got a 50% discount on the valuation of the team. So talk about your golden pathways.
Well, that's just goes to show the power of star power. If you and I showed up at $200 million, we wouldn't got that valuation. Not that either of us could do that, but Brady's such a big name. That's exactly why. But I listen. I mean, okay, sports journalism ain't exactly covering the presidential election. Okay. It's not covering foreign policy in the Middle East. At the end of the day, it's not that important. However, you have to, I think, maintain professional, dignity. Is that the, maybe that's not the right word, professionalism and objectivity here. And you can't, in good conscience, bring a guy in who owns a part of the Raiders and disallow him from interviewing the opposing team, criticizing the NFL on the air, and still call it objective analysis. You cannot. But the NFL is going to pretend like he is nonetheless. And I think it's not good for. I don't think it's good for the networks. If it were me, I wouldn't. He's on CBS or Fox? Does anybody remember Fox? I would refuse. If I were Fox, I would let him go. If you cannot perform your duties in an objective way, because I think we talked about this when we talked about it before, but like these crews will roll in on like Wednesday or Thursday. Like I was on a plane once with Marcus Allen, on a Wednesday, I think it was, and he was flying into whatever city it was he was going to. And they will go into in-depth study. They'll go to practice. They'll interview the teams. They go to the locker room. They talk to the players. And he's not allowed to do any of that unless it's the Raiders, presumably, who aren't going to be on Fox that much. So I think that it's kind of shameful. It's a shameful use of him, and it's just banking on the star power, and that's it.
And well, first of all, this was a unanimous vote because the ownership had to come together.
Of course, they're going to want Brady involved.
But Clark Hunt Jr., you'd think a couple of the AFC West teams would have put at least a ceremonial no, knowing that it was going to pass regardless, because you want him this involved it seems like ridiculous.
Yes, they do. He's the biggest name in football. I agree with you. Okay, I'm on your side about it, but I think what you're saying outweighs is outweighed by the fact that Tom Brady is probably the biggest star in sport, the most accessible star in sports outside of even the NFL world. It's probably Brady.
Yeah, I'm so over this guy. But I don't disagree with you. I don't disagree with you. But I just want to point out one more thing. He is barred from criticizing any aspect of the NFL.
That's what I'm saying. It's referees, not objective. They cannot pretend it's objective journalism.
So who wants to watch that broadcast? Okay. So they're obviously going to be doing marquee games. Think about that. I guess it was the NFC Championship game like 5 or 6 years ago where the Saints got jobbed on that.
He's not going to be allowed to say, "Hey,
he's not going to be able to call out the play."
He cannot.
That's crazy.
I don't even know why he'd want to do it, to be honest. I mean,
first of all, he's being paid more than his contract with Fox for this is larger than his buy-in for the Raiders. So that's one reason.
Yeah, that money, of course. I mean, it's just business, obviously.
I think it's 365 was the total amount, $1 million of his Fox contract. And what did he buy in for? 200 million?
200 million, yeah.
Right. So
it's not even all. I mean, his share, it's him and his partner both for 200 million. So his share is less than that.
So you can even make an argument that his Fox contract is partially financing his buy-in to the NFL.
Yeah. I mean, he's probably not getting all 100 million from Fox up front or whatever, 300 or whatever it is. But yes, in part, yes, certainly, yes.
Total joke.
I think
justice for Greg Olson.
I think for Brady, it's probably about ego. He's got to hear himself on. He has to be involved in ownership, and he also wants to hear himself on TV to stay in the spotlight. Because if you're a minority owner, it's a big news right at the time. And you're going to be on camera in some owner's box and stuff, but you're not in the public conscious every day. Look like Magic Johnson owns a part of the Dodgers and he owns a part of the Washington Seawards, right? He's not involved in either one to any extent at all. They'll show him on camera every once in a while. That's it. So once you get over the Tom Brady is a part owner, then it kind of goes away a little bit. So I think he wants to be on TV for that reason. I'm really shocked about Fox more than anybody. And yeah, justice for Greg Olson. I agree with you. I don't know how you can throw Tom Brady out there and say he's an analyst, especially an analyst. Maybe be a play-by-play, maybe, but an analyst when you cannot criticize the NFL and you can't go meet with either team. It's crazy.
And hardly a player. I think Pat Summerall, who some of you may not even remember was actually a player, is the only player that transitioned to play-by-play. Like that's not a normal path. Players don't normally become the play-by-play people.
No, because they're not good enough at it.
Right, that's a skill.
Yeah, I mean, they can get up there and analyze plays better than I can, but very few people can do play-by-play to that extent, and that's exactly why.
So we'll stay in the NFL as we kind of look at these weird ownership deck chairs type deals. The Chargers, who are always a ownership mess, and the Spanoses are always in some brouhaha.
It's one of those things. They've got a bunch of kids and stuff involved, and they're all idiots. And
and they're if it wasn't for Justin Herbert, they'd be a completely irrelevant franchise. I guess Jim Harbaugh now, but and they're actually playing pretty well. But that franchise is a joke, in terms of everything that isn't on the field. And so now they've let this dude, he's a private equity baron, but he's not yet bringing in private equity for this purchase. But what did he purchase? 27% now?
27% for $750 million.
Right. And he got what? Like almost a 30% discount?
He got a 30% discount on valuation. So the value, they gave him a $4 billion valuation, but CNBC had it valued at $5.83 billion. So even if that's, change the numbers a little bit, it's in the neighborhood of a 30% discount.
Yeah, we know that we basically know $6 billion is the floor now for the next time a team comes up for sale.
Well, the Chargers don't own the stadium; they're leasing space from the Stan Kroenke.
Yeah, Kroenke, right. The Kroenke's Cathedral there, which is just embarrassing that they would do, but whatever, that's a different story. This isn't that surprising.
Yeah, are they that second rate? They can't have their own stadium.
It's ridiculous. But here's the interesting part is there was already some ownership fights about control going on. In fact, one of the things this does is it takes care of a lawsuit that was going on between Spanos and another minority owner. So I think probably the influx of cash allowed this lawsuit to get dropped. So it does sort of solve a legal issue for Spanos and the Chargers ownership group. However, You really can say, is this a slow build towards this what's his name? What's the new owner or
Tom
partial owner?
Gores.
Yeah. So is Tom Gore, is this because that's a significant chunk, right? When we talk about minority ownership and other, we're talking about 5, 10%, 12%. This is 27%. So is this a sizable chunk that is like basically the first installment of this Gore's character eventually taking over the Chargers?
Well, I think that's the bigger story. Yeah, and the private equity part's interesting because there's not a lot of difference between saying Tom Gores as an individual is paying 750 million versus him shuffling the money through whatever his private equity fund is. There's not a lot of difference there. Okay, and so it's the impact is sort of the same as bringing private equity in. Okay, but I think the bigger story here is and the next one of these we're going to mention Arod here in a minute because Arod is is in a mess arbitration with the ownership of the Minnesota Timberwolves, right? And so both of them are trying to do kind of tiered purchases. Arod and whoever's partner is, whose name is escaping me right now, bought a minority chunk of the Timberwolves, and now a few years later they're trying to buy the rest of it. Now Tom Gores is buying 27% for $750 million. I think anybody, which what you're alluding to, would see that maybe as a sign that he wants to buy the Spanos family out. I don't know who would want to spend $750 million on a minority share and have no stake in or say so in operations whatsoever on a long-term basis. So I think it's probably, is this the new way of having to buy football teams? Because NFL teams are so expensive and basketball teams are right there with them. It's several $billion now. There's just very few groups can afford to do that, especially when you can't bring corporate ownership in the NFL. So is this kind of the tiered structure, the new way of buying football teams? That's what's the most interesting kind of macro point out of this.
Yeah, and you can, if you think of Gores as a lion and the NFL 32 NFL teams as gazelles, then the Chargers are that weak gazelle that you target, right?
Oh yeah, kind of. If you want to look at it like that, I mean, a lion is going to, take the most available,
Path of
gazelle.
least resistance.
Yeah, the weakest and slowest gazelle is going to get captured by the lion, and that's definitely the Chargers are down there. You could, the Panthers are a mess. There's some other teams, but the Chargers are one of the bigger messes in the NFL. So this guy swoops in, $750 million, 27%. He's halfway there to a majority stake, and it's not that big of a leap for a guy like this to throw in the next, 20, what is that, 23% to come up with a majority stake.
And then the next chunk is probably his private equity firm, right? Which is what was the ceiling? 12%, I think.
Something like that. Yeah, 10 or 12%. Yeah.
Right. So now his private equity firm a year or two from now comes in and buys at whatever the max, and suddenly you're getting close to controlling stake.
Yeah. Then he's up to 37%, say. Then he's only got, 14% more to buy out, and Spanos is out.
And it's a little easier even because the Spanoses have their ownership divided a little way. So it's actually,
it's the family has got it kind of, broken up in chunks. Yeah.
It's not like, so it's actually even a little bit of an easier path. So it's super fascinating. It probably means that the Chargers still won't spend any money. But
I don't know. I just want to emphasize, because if we're for the Washington centric out there, you don't understand this. The Chargers have been a train wreck for a long, long time from an ownership perspective, and it's Spanos. It's the kids. It's always the case with these billionaires. The kids are usually a mess, and that's the case here. And they have. It's been amateur hour with the. We've talked about some of the Chargers problems on this show before. And it's really amateur hour with those guys. And that's the other thing. Like a guy like Tom Gores, who's not amateur hour, is not going to want to get married to a bunch of clowns. There's a reason and a strategy for this, and it's not because he's in bed with the Spanos family.
And you think about the Cronkies and the Josh Harrises of the world. He's another one. He already owns the Detroit Tigers.
Yeah, I didn't mention that. Yeah,
including with his private equity firm as well. So, this is one of these kind of new breed of types, right? That end up owning stakes, if not outright ownership control, in a number of franchises across leagues.
And what would probably happen is Gores would certainly drop the next, 23%, bring the private equity fund in, and he'd have to drop the next, 14 or 15%, but he's going to find investors, an investment team to buy the rest of it out.
Yeah.
He's not going to leave Spanos in charge, or Spanos in there as a minority owner.
It also shows you this new breed of sports ownership where it's guys that know how to raise capital, right? Like traditionally buying a sports franchise was kind of the toy, right? You made your money in oil, you made your money in, microchips or whatever, right? Kind of traditional paths to wealth. And then you would buy sports teams as a vanity, as something that you always wanted to do. In the NFL's case, just an amazing investment. There's few things that have the return on investment. But now you're starting to see these ownership groups that these are guys who they made money by making money, right? They made money by, equity firms, capital investments. And so the Josh Harris model, this Gores, you're starting to see a new breed of owner that they know how to finance stuff in ways that your oil baron does not.
Can contrast Tom Gores with a guy like Dr. Jerry Buss.
Right.
Okay. Jerry Buss, first of all, wasn't a medical doctor. He was one of these guys that had, and he bought the Lakers for something ridiculous, like less than 100 million or something. And it was a complete vanity tool. It was a tool for him to go find women and hang out with famous people in LA. And it was not, if you watch that show, they ran it on a shoestring budget for years. It was in no way was this some sort of like big money, major investment. It was just an ego and chasing women thing for him. And then he sold it to Jack Kent Cooke. Or he bought it from Jack Kent Cooke. Yeah, right. But it's become a multi-billion-dollar thing for his family. Now Gores is at the extreme other end from Jerry Buss, and Jerry Buss not the only one. He's just popped in my head. Gores is a professional sports investor, exactly like Josh Harris, like you said. Just think about the contrast between the two, though. Dr. Jerry Buss in the late 1970s, who's a clown, versus Tom Gores, who's a professional sports investor, basically.
It was funny. My brothers and I, because I'm a big Washington Capitals fan, and they beat the New Jersey Devils last night. So in our text chain, it was like, F Josh Harris, screw you, Josh. Just because it was funny because he owns the Devils. So, no, we don't obviously mean that. And on Sunday, we'll be singing his praises about saving our team. But it was just kind of funny. Like on Saturday night, we loathe him and laugh at beating his team. And on Sunday, we'll root for his team.
Yeah, I mean, and he's a guy who owns a smaller percentage of Washington than almost any other owner owns any other team. And the reason is these valuations are so high that you cannot, and short of a guy like, an Elon Musk type who really can come up with billions of dollars on the fly, or who's that guy who owns Amazon, Bezos, guys like that can do it. But there's very few rich people who can throw together billions of dollars in cash like that. And Gores isn't one either, by the way, especially since, he's going to have an investment group. This is why I'm saying is that I think the big point to take out of this, other than the fact that Tom Brady should not be doing ownership and sports announcing, is keep an eye out on how often these kind of tiered takeovers take place from now on, because that may be the only way for an individual to do it.
And we'll quickly hit this Arod one. So here was an explicit tiered takeover. I mean, this was an agreement between the Timberwolves owner and Arod and his partner to do this, to buy chunks and over time buy enough chunks to become the primary controlling owners of the Timberwolves. However, the Timberwolves owner was like, psych, I want to keep it. And so now we're heading to what, arbitration, right? Or to a legal fight.
Arbitration. So, so let me briefly say what this is. When you file a lawsuit, it goes to court, obviously, and then the judge alone or a jury will decide your fate. Arbitration is when you're removing it from a courtroom and you go before an arbitrator or a panel of arbitrators, which are usually retired judges, but it's not a court at all. And then the arbitrator or the arbitration panel will decide your fate. And then you present your case in front of the arbitrator or arbitration panel in the exact same way as you would in front of a courtroom. Just the advantage is basically you're controlling the jury. You can't control what a jury is, but an arbitrator, theoretically, they know the business. And so it's probably, you have another level of expertise. Then there's something called mediation, which is you're also going before usually a former retired judge, but then the mediator will just try to broker a deal between the people. So those are kind of three ways to settle things. In this case, this was a lawsuit that is now before an arbitrator who will decide whether or not the owner of the Timberwolves has to sell the rest of his toy to Arod and his partner. That's what's going on here.
Yeah, so basically the owner pulled the deal off the table, and now the arbitrators will figure.
And there's some, and we haven't read it to this extent because it's not worth it for me to get in level detail. But the basic gist of it is that Arod and his partner are claiming that the Timberwolves owner is in breach of contract. Okay, they have some sort of purchase agreement type thing in place, and Arod and his partner saying you can't just ignore this because you're contractually obligated to sell, and the owner is going, "F you, no, I don't." That's the case.
It probably was the Timberwolves owner seeing the recent sale price of the Phoenix Suns, I believe, which was $4 billion, and the fact that Timberwolves are actually competitive, and it was like, whoa.
It might be that. It might be that, yeah. Because now Brian Windhorst is, Doctor NBA for ESPN, and he says, the purchase of the last 60% was set. It's a $1.5 billion total sale, and that's way lower than the Suns, which is to your point. And so I think this owner is thinking I could get like 3, but I'm stuck with this deal I signed several years ago before valuation really went through the roof. And so it's worth it for me to go spend $20 million in a lawsuit to try to get out of having to sell the team at a greatly reduced rate. That's what this is about. And 20 million, just, I mean, off the top of my head, a butt ton of attorney's fees.
Yeah, so we'll probably return to this one when some judgments and some, when we get a little bit more clarity. I always root against A-Rod. I think A-Rod's probably more in the right, but I'll still root against him.
Yeah, again, like I said early in the beginning of the show, I think A-Rod is actually pretty well spoken in his baseball analysis. So I like that about him, but he's such a smarmy dude. It's hard to root for him, and I'm not a New Yorker at all, but he's hard to root for on a personal level, even though I like his baseball analysis.
Well, I mean, has anyone been able to keep their reputation even in baseball after the steroids more than A-Rod? I mean, who else?
I don't know how he pulled it off.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean,
the best hitter in baseball history is undeniably Barry Bonds, in my view.
Well, not to mention greatest pitcher possibly, or on the conversation with Roger Clemens.
Yeah, those two are pariahs.
Yeah,
and Barry Bonds is a jerk, and Roger Clemens is kind of a jerk too. But the best or one of the best pitchers and hitters in baseball are completely banned, and A-Rod did the same thing as they did. Somehow he's all over the place. I don't know how he pulled it off.
You can imagine, you can even make a case A-Rod's was worse, but in terms of all the Balco stuff and, how much black eye he gave baseball.
Bonds was in there too, but yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, they're all bad. I just, two are pariahs and one we have to, watch.
They're bending over backwards to keep him around.
Yeah, it's crazy. All right, let's get to the fun part. Well, there's elements that aren't so fun, but so we have covered various trials and tribulations of the WWE on this show. Not most recently about McMahon's legal and ownership trouble and in and out, and had some fun with that. But we also talked about their mega deals with networks, and just what a kind of gargantuan business this is. They had a bunch of ownership shakeups in the last couple of years that have been interesting. So we've sort of talked about the WWE on a bunch of angles. And so when I saw on Netflix that they had, I think, a 6 or 7 part docu-series called Mr. McMahon, I was like, oh, this should be interesting. And I've always had a passing interest in wrestling since I was a kid, and always enjoyed kind of the wrestling culture and kind of pop culture parts of it. So I started it, and I also knew it would be relevant for the show just because we covered parts of it. But and it was basically produced by The Ringer. It was Joel Schumacher, same team that did the Andre the Giant documentary on HBO a couple years ago.
Bill Simmons was involved in this, wasn't he?
Yeah. So it's basically the same people that did 30 for 30, right? So it started that. So long time sports documentarians. And wow, was this relevant and just eye popping in terms of unpacking the phenomenon that is Vince McMahon. And then as documentarians that always sometimes get real lucky, they were probably, Vince McMahon is interesting on his own, but then I think they started shooting this in 2021. All the scandals that we've been talking about over the last couple of years on this show basically broke while they're filming this documentary. So then they had to come back and do a bunch of updates, in 2024, probably earlier this year, even to cover the latest accusations, which are by far the worst. But you watch this documentary and you get to, if you start at the end or the lawsuits, man, the previous 25, 30 years of the WWE make it 0% shocking that these things show up in real life, because the lines have been blurred here to a funhouse mirror level almost through Vince McMahon's entire reign. So if it played out in the squared circle, it was playing out in reality behind the scenes.
Yeah, I mean, and when the first time he resigned, we both thought it was just a scam and a story. It turns out it wasn't. So Chris made me watch this. I didn't even know about it. I'm not a big wrestling guy. Chris made me watch it, and I ended up watching all 6 episodes because it was fascinating. And I kind of checked out of wrestling after Hulk Hogan, basically. Like, I remember Hulk Hogan turning into a bad guy, and not for any reason. I just kind of lost interest in it. I was not aware of the depth of the character McMahon played in the wrestling storyline over the years. I knew he was a part of it. I did not know he was the central figure in the fiction for 15 years at least, maybe more. I was not aware of that. And so the first 5 episodes of this are basically going over the history of the WWF/WWE from the time McMahon came into prominence. It talks about how he basically ignored the kind of the informal handshake protocol between the owners of the various wrestling leagues. And for those of you too young to remember, and this goes before my time too, wrestling was separated into regions. And so there are owners of, the Northeast and the West and regions, and they didn't infringe on anybody's territory. Well, the first episode of this, it was called Mr. McMahon, by the way.
Mr. McMahon.
You say that? Yeah. The first episode goes into detail about how he just ignored all that and took over the entire country and forced everybody out of business, and then bought all their stars. And which is, from a business perspective, brilliant. He didn't have any legal obligation to not do that.
No, these were just norms.
Yeah, right. And so he was just a better businessman. But I think what I learned is, first of all, Vince McMahon is a Donald Trump level narcissist, first of all. And I'm not trying to be political. I mean, Donald Trump is an extreme narcissist.
To the point where they wrote it into the narrative.
Yeah, Vince McMahon is that big of a narcissist. And as what Chris has said is his narcissism became the central key component of his Mr. McMahon character that he played in the wrestling ring. And I think one of the major questions from the show is, how much of a character did Vince McMahon play and how much that was real life? Now, what's very interesting is he's also in a bigger amount of denial than almost anybody you ever find. Throughout the documentary, he consistently said, "Oh, I'm just playing character. None of this is like me at all." Everybody else they interviewed were like, that's pretty a lot like him. Yeah.
And so, there's whole storylines of him having affairs. The reality is he's having affairs, and
we all thought it was just everybody. I mean, I wasn't paying attention, but most people just thought it was a character he was playing. But what we learned is it wasn't.
No,
and it was really ugly and gross behind the scenes.
And they were pro wrestling. I mean, obviously levels of artifice on top of it, but they were just ripped from their lives. The thing that's so creepy to me, really, well, outside of we'll probably finish with it. I mean, his latest allegations are not just playing a little bit.
Well, this is what we talked about a couple months ago, and we can summarize it here a little bit. But yeah, go ahead.
But what he put his family through, and then is just crazy. I mean, he's basically cheating on Linda McMahon, who's got a name for herself on I mean, she was in the Trump administration, for heaven's sakes. He just basically writes his cheating on or serial cheating on her as a storyline. He puts, he sexualizes his daughter to the degree that is, I mean, they have a storyline where they roofie her so that she fake marries, and all that implies Triple H,
who she married in real life, by the way.
I mean, it is crazy. And now, but you have to give those two credit, because I think they've somewhat orchestrated this takeover. Triple H and the Stacey McMahon, I think, have basically taken over the league, and I think actually drove that current sale and drove the father out.
Well, so there have been, they won't admit it really on camera, but there's been strife in the family, and with this documentary showed. Number one, he ran his own son out. Shane McMahon, he ran his own son out of business. And number two, the daughter, is it Stacy? Can you look it up? I don't think it's Stacy. The daughter quit at one point in time and left the business entirely. It appears as though mostly because she got tired of the Vince McMahon, Mr. McMahon abusing the daughter stereotype. There you go, Stephanie. So Stephanie quit the business entirely for a couple of years. So they claim. It looks like because she got really tired of her father's nonsense, and so it caused a massive amount of drama. And just think about like the disrespect that you're showing your spouse by having a storyline you're asking people to believe where you're a serial cheater on camera. None of that matters.
They make her catatonic in a wheelchair at one point. It is crazy. Now, if you were watching it at the time,
well, and everybody in every story, there was nothing off limits for Vince McMahon. Everything throughout this documentary, he was talking about that could have made a good story. That could have made a good story. There was absolutely nothing that was off limits to him. There was one thing that was off limits, and they mentioned in the story, and that was somebody proposed that they were going to have an incest storyline between him and the daughter, Stephanie. And that's the only thing he ever said no to.
But no, I think, I can't remember exactly, but he actually was okay with it for a while. I think she said no.
Yeah. Maybe that's me. Yeah, that's true. Maybe that was true. Yeah.
So, and they certainly got close to it, even with,
yes,
it was crazy. And then they
did roofie, and they roofied her, like you said. Yes. I mean, the storyline was she was supposed to marry someone else.
The nice guy wrestler.
Yeah, and then Triple H roofied her, bragged about it on camera, and had a film, again, a fake film of him dragging around the comatose Stephanie, who's out of it, and marrying a drugged up woman. It's just, you'd get thrown in prison for this if it was in real life.
And meanwhile, now in real life, with the latest allegations, is they basically were doping out this woman and passing her around and keeping her. Well,
when we're not talking about Stephanie, we're talking about the one
the latest allegations.
Yeah. Yes, you go ahead.
So it even plays out there. Now, what was interesting is that was in the backdrop, and we covered this story, right? Because we were like, he gets kicked out, he comes back, he never left the board, right? We were like, this seems fishy. Then they negotiate that sort of merger with the Ultimate.
It was a corporate merger, yeah.
And then so the parent company took over, and they retained him for a while, and then the newest story broke about the sexual trafficking. And at that point, they let him back in. And so he didn't have.
So let me explain about the corporate merger part. So the corporate, I've seen these because I've done these. So when a big company, one company overtakes another company, a lot of times they will allow the CEO, the old CEO, they'll cut a business deal where the old CEO will be allowed to stay on and will have a title, president or something else. And it's a part of the deal for the old person to kind of save face, for lack of a better term. But he's not really in charge, because he's a minority owner, but they'll let him have a big title. And that's kind of what the deal McMahon kind of cut. And then when this new allegations, which are gross, like we talked about, the new allegations are sex trafficking and rape. They're really, really awful. They threw him out.
Yeah, they're basically pimping out this one employee of the company.
Yes.
To wrestlers, to business partners, whatever.
And some of the text messages that are, I went over the petition at the time we did this story in detail, and she's got quotes of text messages from him on there, which are just some of the more obscene stuff you'd ever see somebody write.
Except that the actual WWE writers already wrote it, because they do a great job of finding this archival footage of him making, like, whether it was a woman wrestler or somebody, that bark like a dog and take. So, like,
it's very misogynistic,
right? And it all played out in the ring. So, like, it is just wild. And the fact that, so put the newest things aside for a second. Let's even if you take everything up to this, last 4 years of trouble here. I mean, the things this guy survived, dropping a wrestler from a crane and killing him and continuing the meet as the blood is on,
Can you just stop right there for a minute? Yeah. I knew kind of about this, and we're talking about Owen Hart. Okay. And what happened to Owen Hart, for those of you unaware, is he was going to be lowered down onto the stage / ring,
like a flying harness type thing.
Yeah. And the harness broke and he fell. Now the lights were off, so the crowd didn't see the fall. They just saw him lying there with medical people hovering over him. And most of the people in the arena probably thought it was a part of the gag.
Yeah.
The announcers got really quiet and said, "This is not a part of the gag. This is not supposed to happen. This is awful." Vince McMahon made the decision to continue. They dragged the dead body off the stage and they continued with the show, which is despicable and it's disrespectful, and they definitely should have canceled the entire show. And it just shows you what type of a creep he is.
Yeah. And so all the things he survived even before the recent stuff. I mean, the WWF, whatever, was an open air drug market for steroids, painkillers, cocoane.
And he got sued over it. He got sued over it. And he got,
every time.
Yeah. Yeah. And they could never nail him on it. And Hulk Hogan's mentioned in here, and Hogan testified against him, but ultimately didn't really rat him out like the prosecutors. He got charged with a crime, by the way. It wasn't just a lawsuit, it was a criminal charge against McMahon. And Hogan was the one that kind of got him off the hook because he didn't testify to the depth that the prosecutors expected him to testify. Hogan told the prosecutors, "I'll tell you everything." And then when he got on the stand, he didn't tell them everything.
Hogan does not come off looking good.
No, he does not. No.
And the series, I think, because I know the guy that works at the Ringer, Joel, I don't know him, but Joel Schumacher, and he's written books on him. He's a wrestling historian. So I think they even go out.
You don't know him. You're just saying.
I know. No, I know him as a journalist.
Okay.
Yeah. But he kind of goes out. They do make a bunch of the wrestlers look okay. But then so I was telling my friend the other day, like, you really should watch this. And he's like, "Yeah, I remember the wrestling back in the day, blah, blah, blah." And he's like, "Yeah, remember Jimmy Superfly Snuka?" I'm like, "Well, interestingly enough, Jimmy Superfly Snuka killed a prostitute in a hotel room, which then Vince McMahon covered up.
And got away with it." Yeah.
I mean, just crazy stuff.
Well, I mean, and it goes into detail about the Chris Benoit murder-suicide.
Yep, they right.
And Chris Benoit was a wrestler who killed his family, his wife, and I forget how many kids. 1 kid, 2 kids.
2, I think, at least.
Yeah, and then killed himself. And this was several years ago. And the charge was that the steroids and the drugs that he was coerced into taking caused his mental state to become that. And wrestling totally disassociated themselves with entirely. Said, this is nothing to do with us. Vince McMahon on the documentary said, "This has nothing to do with me." Very, very callous. Yeah, I think Vince McMahon comes off really, really badly in this. Even before, what's interesting is the documentary mentions that he's cut out of like the last few interviews because that's when the sexual stories broke. But even before that, he comes off as, like I said, an extreme narcissist, delusional about reality. And having zero respect for anybody around him, including his wife and including his children, comes off as bad as you could come off. And I did not. Did you see? They had some film of him with the worst hair dye job I've ever seen.
Oh, when he had the mustache too. Like it was like they gave him a slightly different look when he returned from the allegations.
He looked like a clown. He really looked like a clown.
It was really strange. And you can kind of, he did so many steroids. I mean, he is just jacked. at certain points. So,
And
and
he's
you
like
can tell
75
now.
years
He's like
older. Yeah.
slimming, now that he's not doing that, he's like a bag of
Him and
skin.
Sylvester Stallone probably have the same dealer.
Yeah. I mean, he got crazy jacked through a bunch of that. It is a really insane docu-series on all kinds.
I'm really glad you made me watch it, because I was like, I would never. It's like wrestling, who cares? But it was very insightful. And I think the lesson here is, when one has too much power and influence, and you mix reality with the fantasy, it's going to blow up. Because that's exactly when it started. Vince McMahon was probably always an egomaniac, but there was a dividing line between the stories he was creating with the characters performing and him. And what it became was all about this like disassociated narrative about a blown up version of himself for 15 years.
Yeah, longer even. Yeah.
Yeah. It grew just absolutely gross.
Yeah. I mean, his son literally has to put his body in harm's way to get like a good job, son, because he just continues to slam him. This is after the Owen Hart, by the way.
Yeah. And Chris is not making this up. That the son Shane talked about that. He said he talked about the moment he finally got a good job, son, from his dad.
Yeah, after throwing his body off of 3 stories into
apparently
a table.
I mentioned this to a coworker, and she said, who's a huge wrestling fan, and she was talking about how Shane was never really a good wrestler, but he had to do all these crazy things because of his dad, and that really came across in the document in the show.
Yeah, because he doesn't even look like a wrestler. Even when
no, he looks like a dude pretending to be a wrestler.
Yeah, you put a big T-shirt on him, but then, but even some of these, now they didn't interview people like The Rock and John Cena after the allegations. You can kind of clock the year, because they put years so you could kind of know before and after. But but still, some of these wrestlers, I mean, The Rock and John Cena, who are obviously transcend wrestling by a large margin.
Especially The Rock.
Yeah. They still give him all the praise. One thing I loved about the documentary was, well, I can't remember his name, but that one guy who worked basically is like a Vince McMahon subordinate. And when they brought him back in 2024 or late 23, and he was really upset with the documentarians. He's like, this was a hit job the whole time. I would never have participated in this. I thought this was going to be like a love letter to Vince McMahon. And they're like, well, sorry.
Yeah, you lose the love letter status when you talk about all the things you talked about. And when you get charged with, Vince McMahon probably belongs in jail for the latest allegations, to summarize, was one of the employees had an affair with Vince McMahon. That all by itself is bad enough in that it's sexual harassment. He's the boss, she's a subordinate. But the worst part about it, and he was just a total creep. But the criminal part is that he allegedly passed her around a bunch of wrestlers, basically as a prostitute. Like he was basically pimping her out, and it's just the worst. And so that conduct probably belongs in jail for him. I don't know why he hasn't been charged with the crime yet. Maybe he will be, but he should be.
No, he's a Teflon. He's got 9 lives. All the cliches and stereotypes. You might catch up to him here at the end of his run, but yeah, it is a really, and even just like the history of like the regional wrestling. I mean, if you like any of that kind of stuff and these sort of like the storylines of these wrestlers, and then it takes on a pretty sinister, kind of bent towards the second half. But it's actually, there's parts of it. It is just fascinating. And what's really kind of is a theme to the show. All this happens and wrestling's doing just fine.
The business is, yeah, because a big part of this is them competing with the WCW in the 90s. And at one point they were teetering on the edge of bankruptcy, but they overcame all. And by the way, they're still doing great without Vince McMahon involved.
Right. This new ownership group is flying high.
Yep.
Led by, or partially led at least by, his daughter and one of his superstars.
Yeah. I mean, and the daughter may have the biggest complaint of all out of the family, as poorly as she was treated.
Oh, it is. It's
gross.
There are moments that it's a rough watch.
Yeah, it's gross.
Yeah. So there we go. You can.
We went way over time, but it was worthwhile to talk about it.
Yeah. So There you go. All right, Steve, anything, obviously you're rolling out with some, at least, less, more victory Mondays than normal.
Well, there's a point in every season when you cover Washington, as long as we have, in which I'm basically saying the same things over and over again about these games that they blow terribly, and they just look awful. The difference here is that loss against the Ravens was a different kind of loss. They looked like they belonged on the field with the Ravens. They lost, but they looked like they belonged. And so it's kind of interesting to have these discussions about a different caliber team than we've ever seen before, probably since the RG3 years. So you can watch us do this by checking out the Hawkseye podcast, which is released every Thursday. And then you can read all of our regular written content on thehawkseye.com.
And hopefully fans of the team are not gnashing their teeth and asking who is Chuba Hubbard sometime next week.
They might. They might.
All right. We'll see you in 2 weeks.